Hi guys, today I'm going to do a quick video on how to monitor your cloud solution locally in your IT infrastructure. So if you have a hybrid environment where you have part of your servers running in a cloud solution like Amazon Web Services EC2 and some of it's running locally in your local infrastructure, if you want to monitor these servers in the cloud to make sure they're properly being serviced and properly up, the services are running, that the end user should be able to access the services they need, then just keep watching. I'll show you how to use Nagios and a specific Nagios plugin for monitoring cloud solutions. So running a hybrid cloud is becoming really popular. It's a very cost-effective way to run services temporarily in your environment that you might need just for a special project or for some beta testing. So being able to monitor these services is really important. So just keep watching. I'll show you guys how easy it is to get started monitoring these services in your IT infrastructure.
The first thing I do is I go into Amazon Web Services and I created an instance. You might already have instances running that you want to monitor. So I created a test instance for this demo here. So I'm just having that start up. I'm going to make sure that I'm able to log in and everything. So if you're doing this a test environment, I might make another video about Amazon Web Services. It's a great product. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at CloudWatch. CloudWatch is their utility to monitor the performance of your instances and your storage. So if you click on EC2 at the bottom there, you can kind of look at my single instance I just created. And then you can look at the metrics names. So that's what we're going to be using later on when we use the CloudWatch API in with the Ruby script. After that, you want to make sure the CloudWatch monitoring is enabled. By default, it is enabled, so you don't have to necessarily worry about that. You can disable it. I believe there is a small fee. Amazon does charge for that, so just so you're aware, you want to make sure if you're worried about the cost that you take a look at that. And now we're going to go ahead and take a look at our Nagios plugin that we're going to use. This one is a Ruby script specifically used to use the Amazon Web Services CloudWatch API. It's actually very easy to set up. It's a great thing to be able to monitor your instances, make sure your performance and everything is working properly. And it has a number of matrix, Amazon Web Services CloudWatch matrix that you can use this API with. So one of the things we can do is monitor the EC2. That's the computing, elastic block storage, and RDS is rational database services. So if you run like MySQL, this API will, this plugin will work for all of those Amazon Web Services. So it kind of has some instructions here. It has the review if you want to read some comments people wrote about it, positive comments. So this is why I selected this product to monitor web instances. So I'm going to go ahead and download the 4 files. They're tiny text files, they're configuration files, sample files, and of course the Ruby file. So we're going to go ahead and download that, and we're going to be using them throughout the video. So I went ahead and put it in my downloads folder, and once we do that, you're able to go in, and we're going to be running these scripts shortly, so you want to make sure you know where you put them. The next step is to install the latest version of Ruby. I found that worked the best. It caused the least amount of issues. So I went ahead and I'm going to download the source code. I found that was better than working with the precompiled binaries that you would get using like apt-get or yum. So I went ahead and went to the Ruby website, ruby-lang.org, and I downloaded the latest that were released at the time. It was 2.3.1. And then this is going to be a very traditional way of compiling code. If you compiled any source code in the past, it's going to be very similar. But if you haven't, it's actually relatively easy. So you just want to make sure you have a compiler installed like GCC. And having also make installed or gmake. But either having those installed will make it a lot easier to compile the source code. If you want to use apt-get or yum to install those tools, that's perfectly fine. So we can go to downloads folder after we download the source code for Ruby, and we're going to extract it using tar. So it extracts and uncompresses at the same time. And you go into the Ruby's folder, there's going to be a configuration file. So we can go ahead and hit configure, and then it's going to check all the system settings to make sure that can be compiled on the local system. And then we're going to run make, which is going to go ahead and build the source code. Again, this is where you would need a compiler like GCC to be able to complete that make step. And then as root, so you can do sudo, or if you log in as root, you're going to do sudo make install, and that will actually add it, the compiled files into your system file system, so your system directories such as user local bin. Now let's go ahead and install some of the required gems, Ruby gems, that are required to work with this specific Nagios plugin. And they're all cloud related. So we're going to install gem install fog. And this is a cloud infrastructure gem that will allow us to work with any cloud kind of service. And same thing with cloudy script. These again are to be able to interact with a cloud API. So and the next one is AWS, which is a specific gem for interacting with Amazon Web Services. So that is how the Ruby based Nagios plugin is able to interact with the CloudWatch API on Amazon Web Services. So these are relatively installed. Once you have Nagios and Gem, the executable installed, you can go ahead and run those 3 commands to install the required gems. Next, I went ahead and did a gem update system and also a gem install Ruby gems -updates. So these might be unnecessary steps, but I went ahead and did these steps and didn't have any issues configuring the Nagios plugin. So now we're going to go ahead and work with the scripts that we downloaded. The first one is the check file that Nagios will use to actually run the check command. So we're going to copy this over to our Nagios lib executable directory. So I'm copying it over. This is the Ruby file. So cloud check watch, and then depending on if you compiled Nagios from source code or install the precompiled binaries, that path might be slightly different. So I'll put some alternate path in the comments below if that user local Nagios lib xexe is not there. So then once we copy it over, if you go to that directory, you notice all the check commands that Nagios uses to monitor the different services are listed there. So they're all green, which just denotes it as it has the execute bit set. So I'm going to go ahead and check the permissions, check the file ownership, make sure it matches the other check files just to make sure there's no problems. You could encounter very basic issues when permissions or file ownerships is not set correctly. So I just always take the time to make sure the file and the permission settings are set correctly. Once that's done, go ahead and log into Amazon Web Services and click on IAM, which is Identity Access Manager. And I'm going to create a user. So this user is going to be able to access the CloudWatch API and make sure that checkbox is there that will generate a access key. So this is the access key. It's an encrypted key that we're going to be using to be able to access the CloudWatch API without having to provide a username and password. So don't worry, this file, that encrypted entries will not be used in any file. We're actually going to use a Ruby file and actually re-encrypt that so that access key will not be in a clear text file. So that is what we're doing here. We're actually going to use a random public key and we're going to have to generate it. So we're going to go ahead and make this folder and we're going to generate with SSH key gem, we're going to generate a public and private key. And now this file is going to be used with the access encryption file, Ruby access encryption file that we downloaded from the Nagios plugin. So we're going to check the permissions here. I made sure it was matched with Nagios just again for making sure I don't have any issues in the future with file permissions when the Nagios services is running. And now we're going to use the Ruby encrypt credential that we downloaded off the Nagios Exchange site, and we're going to provide it with the access and the secret key that we created in Amazon Web Services, and it's going to output it to that ec2_credentials.conf file. So this file has to be set correctly for us to be able to use the Ruby script to access the CloudWatch API to pull the data of how our instances are performing. So we're going to go ahead and run that command, and it's going to create that file. And this is the encryption of the access key and the access ID from what we generated. So again, it's not exactly what we downloaded from Amazon Web Services, but an encrypted version of it. Now we're going to go over to user local Nagios, and I'm going to create a credentials folder in there. And this is where I'm just going to store that encrypted access key and access ID. And we're going to store it here because the Nagios command to monitor the instance will be needing that file regularly to be able to access the CloudWatch API. Now you have to be sure to check the user you created in Amazon Web Services has the permissions to pull the data you need from CloudWatch. So I'm going to attach a policy to the user that we're going to be using to pull the CloudWatch data with the API. So to be able to attach the policy, now we should be able to run the check CloudWatch status Ruby file and pull the data. So you see how I returned the value there, and that is because that user had access, the user that's associated with the access ID and the access key that I pulled from Amazon Web Services. Now it's just a simple step of configuring the Nagios files. So if we go into our user local Nagios etc objects files, this is where our hosts are defined and our commands are defined. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use one of the pre-existing configuration files for our host. I'm going to copy it so it's less editing. So I'm going to use, in this case, localhost.conf and create an amazonhost.conf file. I'm going to go in and edit that. So I'm going to remove most of the services, the groups and that are listed, and of course modify the defined host. So I'm going to use, you can use generic server or Linux server as the used template. So I left it at Linux server. I'm going to provide the host name, and this is the host name of the instance. So if you go into Amazon Web Services and you pull out the DNS entry, so it's going to be a very long name. And you're going to pull that out and you're going to put it here. So in this case, it's going to start with EC2 and then usually the IP address and some information about the region. You can provide the alias. Again, this is used for the Nagios web interface. So I just called it AWS host. Again, you could give it something more specific to what the system does. And then the address, again, could be the IP address. I put in the DNS entry here, but again, it could be either the IP address or the DNS entry. After that, we're just going to go down here, delete our host server, host group, make sure that's deleted, otherwise you can get a duplicate error when you restart Nagios. And if you go back and look at one of the files we downloaded was a sample service. So this is a template and what it should basically look like to be able to run this service. So we're going to go ahead and modify this entry and make it similar to our sample entry. Just changing, again, maybe the system path and so forth. So we're going to use generic service. Our host name is going to be our EC2 IP address region, that very long entry. And again, you could pull this from your Amazon Web Services interface. We're going to call the service name. I'm checking the CPU utilization in this case, so I'm going to call it CPU usage. And the command, again, is from the sample. So that's nice that they provided the sample. It makes it a lot easier to configure this. So we're going to go ahead and copy it from the sample and then modify it. So I did a few different tests with this to get it just right. So again, this will be in the notes below. But I found that this is what works the best. Again, people have changed it. If you look at some of the review notes, people have changed how they interact with the API. So you could change that here. So I did the CloudWatch. You provide the instance. So these are the different arguments. And again, these arguments will be defined in the command that we're going to modify next. So we have the CloudWatch command that we're going to define in the command file, the instance, the path to the credentials, the metrics title we're using, and the critical and warning percentage. So that is what these arguments will be defined when we go in and modify our command.conf file. Once we're done modifying our Amazon host.conf file, let's go ahead and go into our nagios.conf file and add that as one of the configuration files that should be included in the Nagios service. So if you open up nagios.conf, it has a number of configuration files, and some of them will be like the command and the template. But if you notice, there's going to be a host and a Linux and a Windows host, depending how you personally configure it. but there will be a section for hosts. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new section for Amazon Web Services right next to that. And it's going to be for our Amazon Web Services instances. So again, it's going to be a very similar system path. Cut and paste that, and Amazon host. So this is the same file that we just modified. After that, let's go into our commands.conf file, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and add a new command, and that's the check cloud command. And if you notice, if you look closely, all the commands are associated with what was located in that lib executable directory. So we're just going to add our check underscore CloudWatch underscore status. And this is going to look very similar to what was on the command line. So Ruby options, Ruby gems, Ruby, the path to Ruby, the path to our Ruby script, and then the arguments. So we're going to do the address is the host address, and then our arguments that we specified in the host file. So that's where they're going to be called right here. We're going to restart Nagios. If everything's working correctly, you should be able to go to your Nagios web interface and see our new host listed there. So there we have our EC2 instance. You notice it's up. To be able to ping, by the way, you should open up your security group in Amazon Web Services to allow ICMP traffic, and then you should be able to get that ping to be green in your Nagios web interface. But if you click on the host, you'll notice our CPU usage service is now listing, and it's listing successfully our CloudWatch metrics information about CPU utilization. So once you do that, you know you have successfully configured your Nagios monitoring of your Amazon Web Services instances. And again, we could do the same steps again for any of the Amazon Web Services metrics options.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this is helpful. I hope you get the most out of your cloud solution by monitoring and make sure your services are up for your end users. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time, and subscribe to get updates. Bye, guys.